Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. And I am blessed to be with Mr. Jacy Morris. How you doing, Jacy?
I'm doing all right. Yeah.
All right,
Ready to
dude.
go.
Yes. We have been on the journey today, man, of connecting. We had like computers updating. I'm putting the wrong logos on the screen. Like my editor's like going nuts right now. So it's all good. How you doing, man? How's it going?
I'm doing all right. Yeah. A little frazzled from the updates. That was like an hour long update, which is always nice to do. Pushes everything back.
Yeah, it's a
I
good
got
time,
the,
man.
the people doing yard work over here, so I think we dodged that bullet. So that's
Nice.
good.
Nice. Yeah.
So you won't be hearing the lawnmowers in the background.
It wouldn't be a good podcast episode if it wasn't something.
Oh yeah, that's just how it goes.
And I've never been a highly like polished human anyway, so this is like right on brand. We're good. So we were connected via Catherine Silva, for those looking for her titles, and she was like, "Hey, you should meet my friend Jacy. He's got this new collection coming out called "Bury My Heart with a Keyboard," and I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool." And we had never met. I hadn't even talked to you on social media before that, and was super happy to connect with you. Was fascinated when I saw the book. I'll talk a little bit with you about the cover because there's a connection between you and Brian Boyer there, who's a repeat offender on the show, and Brian's awesome. And so, yeah, I was super excited to get to talk to you about this collection today. And I think I've probably had two, I think this will be the third collection we've covered. And I'm a fan of a good collection because I'm a fan of like really well done short fiction. Although, yeah, I end up spending most of my time with novellas and novels. I love the quick fix, if you will. And I do love a collection that has multiple novellas in it, which this one does. This one has 3 novellas and 11 short stories, correct?
10 short stories and then that one introduction. I guess some people are seeing it as a short story, but it's kind of its own thing that I threw in there.
Gotcha. And you're talking about the acknowledgement of your land acknowledgement?
Yes, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a good place to start, man. Like, for those who haven't picked up the collection yet, and cracked this thing, you're gonna have an awesome forward, by the way. And actually, I wanted to. I was so happy when I read your final chapter of your or a final paragraph of your forward that I was like, I'm gonna make a note of reading this out loud online. So,
Let's
okay.
do it. I want to hear it. What did I write?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, what did I do? So the last paragraph of your forward says, "These stories are my babies, my bastards, unloved, unfed, withering away in their mass grave. Bear witness to them so that they might head onto the next world, able to say they lived, if for but a moment in your mind. Thanks for attending their wake. Sorry about the smell." I was like, yes, this is great. You could have literally just probably had that one paragraph in your forward, and it would have just been like, no one would have probably bat an eye. They'd have been like, oh, it's fantastic. But not to diminish the rest of the forward. But I was so
Yeah,
happy when I read that final paragraph that I was like, dude, I got to read this out loud as a great hook to like get people in here for this
it's so good.
collection.
It's so good. Like when I write so much that like when I'm done, I kind of forget what I wrote. And so when people like quote it back to me, I'm like, oh wow, that's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah, you did great, man. So and then you go into your acknowledgement of your land acknowledgement, and I think it's really important that people understand that there's a heavy indigenous theme in this collection, despite not all of the stories being directly built around an indigenous theme or specifically an indigenous character. But it was great to see this up front, knowing that in your forward you mentioned how you're being indigenous and your focus on indigenous horror kind of paints the tone for the rest of the collection.
Yeah. So I mean, acknowledgement of your land acknowledgement is sort of, a response to I'm multiracial, so I'm white and indigenous. The indigenous presents more depending on the time of year. In the winter, I'm going to get pale as hell, and you won't. Some people don't even know, right?
Mm,
So I kind of exist in two lands, but at these
mm,
staff meetings at school, they trot these things out, and it's very performative, and you're just you're rolling your eyes, and everyone else is rolling their eyes, but you're rolling your eyes for a different reason.
mm,
And that land acknowledgement is just always it's a reflective time for me, and it's
mm.
not necessarily a happy reflect. I don't feel honored really when it happens. Some people do. Some indigenous people do, and that's fine. But for me, I go to a very dark place, and it's my horror mind. It just goes to a dark place. So
Mm,
I thought it would be good to, you know, put my thoughts and feelings into that piece.
mm.
It's pretty strongly worded. I did last November. I read it out loud um, to an audience at the Rose City Book Pub, and it was like it was mostly all white audience, and I could just hear a pin drop at the end of it. I was like, I don't. No one stormed out. No one got angry at me. But yeah, there was some of that in there, but I think that's the honesty of the piece. I think speaks to people,
Right.
and I would have been doing a disservice to myself and other indigenous people if I wasn't honest about it.
Right. Yeah, that's great, man. I was it's educational for me because it's like a my family comes from we're like your typical Ellis Island Italian family. We weren't here on the original wave. We have our own kind of immigration story, and it's kind of the one that was popularized and celebrated in the last century, where it's like, look at this great, it's typical like land of opportunity kind of story. And what I didn't hear about a lot was that we kind of dropped in the middle of the story. We learn all about American history, obviously, in American public schools. And depending on what state you're in, depends on how you learn that history and what history you learn. But here in Virginia, there's quite a focus on the indigenous cultures in Virginia because it was so pivotal of the first colony, and the imprint and presence of those cultures is everywhere in the state of Virginia, even though it was never like the rest of the country wasn't treated with respect when it was occurring.
Yeah,
All of our highways and our areas have these fingerprints all over them, which is never going to do justice to the injustices that were served. But it was interesting for me to read that because being dropped into the middle, we don't fit like the traditional like white culture kind of perspective on it. And so there's a bit of a sympathy that extends to the indigenous culture message that I'm like in full on learning mode
hmm
because it's like, all right, this is something unique, and it's directed like at and around us, and it's kind of interesting to reflect on that because I do have people that I've married into family and all this stuff that have been here since the beginning of the country.
yeah.
And talking to them is wild because I'm like, wait, you guys have been here since the Mayflower? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, that's nuts, man. When I trace my roots back, it goes into Brazil and Portugal and Italy through the migration of my families spawned by wars in Europe. So it's kind of interesting to have this different ability, or not ability, but opportunity to learn. And when I read that, I was like in full on like absorb and learn mode. I just really wanted to hear what you had to say and try and really appreciate what you were saying. And it's impactful, man. It's heavy. So I could see where you probably left a pretty quiet room in your wake.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I had to switch up to a different story after that one. I was like, oh, because I bet I hit him with some of the harder stories right afterwards.
Yeah.
I people would have walked out. I'm sure.
Yeah. No, it was pretty cool to be able to have that experience. And like you said, there's an honor and a levity to a message like that. And I appreciate you sharing that with me as a reader. So tell me a little bit about the rest of the collection, because when I first read your forward and I read the back description, I was thinking that, I was wondering if we were going to stack the novellas up front, like I've seen in other collections where they put the longer fiction in the front and then they put the short stories toward the rear of the book. Um, how did you kind of approach assembling all these short stories, and how's it configured?
Well, there's three phases to that collection. I wrote all that stuff last year, so it's all um, just kind of it's all 2023, right? It's all just
Wow.
my stuff I wrote that I didn't publish. Um, I had probably seven of the short stories where I was doing writing coaching and I was trying to help people, and they were like, "I want to do short stories. I want to submit to this stuff." And I was like, "I've never done that. I don't care about short stories.
Right.
It's not really my jam." But in order to help people, I was like, "I guess I ought to try this out." It's probably the phase of writing I just skipped over.
Hmm.
And so I sat down, I read these short stories, and I started submitting to places. And it's pretty cutthroat. Like you see some of the submission numbers, and you're like, "Oh wow, there's 3,000 people submitting to this. That's insane."
Yeah.
Um, so I think I sold one of the eight that I wrote, and
Right.
that's pretty good, honestly, for having never written that and practicing the form of short stories. Like I wrote short stories when I was in high school, maybe, and
Hmm.
in college a little bit. But so I got all those, and they were good. I liked them. Some of them people were like, "I like this, but we're going to go with these people." Um, and so that was the first wave of stories. The second wave of stories is the three novellas that are in there, which are all kind of just insane and weird and um, political, I would say. And those are harder sells, and I knew they would be harder sells, but that didn't limit me from writing them. Um, and so that's the third. There's three novellas, and then there was the other last October. Carson Winter had a book come out, and I saw him at the Rose City Pub, and he got up there and he spoke, and I was like, "Oh man, that was really cool. That was fun." I've never really done that. I'm sort of a shut in. I'm like, I'd rather be writing. That should be like my T-shirt with a catchphrase. I'd rather be writing, you know. Um, so I went in there and I saw him read, and I got inspired, and I had a couple beverages, and I went up to the lady at the pub, and I was like, "You know what? I think I want to do that." And she's like, "Sure, I got this date open," and it was Black Friday, and I was like, "Oh wow, awesome! Sign me up." And then the next day I woke up, I was like, "Oh no, I've got 4 weeks until that thing, and now I got to start writing these stories." So there's five stories that are at the front of the book that are thematically specifically indigenous because they were designed to kind of take back Black Friday and the day of Thanksgiving, right? Thanksgiving is a tough holiday for me because I'm kind of conflicted. Like, yeah, I have fun with my family, I eat dinner, I watch football, but I'm also kind of like reflective about this isn't really 100% my holiday. And there's a whole other half of me that's like kind of my skin crawls at it. And then you get the day afterwards, it's so commercialized, so just kind of revolting. And I was like, I'd rather just be at a place reading stories and highlighting the things that we didn't think about yesterday while we were stuffing our faces, the things we didn't think about this morning while we were out there trying to get deals and buy stuff for our family and our kids. So that's the third wave of books. And I put all those up at the front because they kind of went together. Um, the novellas are sprinkled throughout with some of the short stories because the novellas are pretty strong and the horror is pretty big in them and it gets big in the novellas. So I felt like people needed a break. And the short stories offer a nice break because the short stories are filled with a little more humor, I'd say, um, and not just straight horror. I try to be funny. I don't know if people get the humor in there. you know, they're lighter, they get a break on them. So
Yeah. No, it's great, man. I like that mix, and it's always interesting to me to be able to discuss that kind of experience with your work, because to me collections have so many different ways of coming together, because like you were saying, you wrote all this in 1 year. Oftentimes collections are collections of short stories and novellas that have accumulated over many years. And it's fascinating to me that you were able to put all of this. One, you're not traditionally a short story writer. Same here. Much like you said, I did that when I was younger, but I find it actually more difficult than writing long fiction now. It's a totally different animal. And the fact that you were able to do all that despite not having those stories picked up for the original submission, here you are, man. You've got all of them picked up and published by Third Estate in a collection. And to me, that's a win because we get to enjoy all of your work instead of jumping all around to get all these different things, which, you know, I'm sure the publishers don't appreciate me saying that, but I'm okay with that. So how did you end up with Third Estate? What was that experience like?
Well, Third Estate is sort of like a passion for me. Like it's not it wasn't a traditional like, hey, I submitted it and we bought it. I'm part of Third Estate. I'm on the board. My guy Aquino, he was looking to put it together to kind of make a make a wave, make a difference, try and get a little more. Like I said about those novellas, they're political. Like people don't want them.
Mm,
But there's a space for them. There's a need for them, and that's kind of what my focus is with Third Estate and Aquino. He wants to, raise up people's voices and offer opportunities for things that wouldn't otherwise be published by some of the indie horror publishers because it's hard. You got to take a chance on some of these things and you're going to piss some people off. And he's okay with that. I'm okay with that. So when he was building it, we've been talking, we just met online. We don't really know each other like that. So he thought of me and I was like, yeah, I'm down. And we were doing a submission period and we were getting a lot of submissions and they weren't all right. When we have a submission at Third Estate, we want you to be saying something. Like you got to have a message, you got to have a point. If it's just horror for horror, there's plenty of people that do that. I don't look down on them, but we're trying to do something else here. And so he put out the monologuist and I was like, why don't I just throw this stuff together so people get an idea of the ethos and the message and the ideas that we're going for. So we're setting the stage so that we can step back so that people can look at these things and go, this is your blueprint for how to get into Third Estate. You say something, you bring the horror, and if you're doing that, you might be a fit with us. And that's kind of how that goes. So we're excited. We signed our first author, Christopher Bond, is going to be putting out Black Out the Stars, which is an awesome book. That's going to be coming out first part of 2025. So yeah, I'm super stoked to get it out there. I'm glad they're going somewhere. I don't make a dime off Bury My Heart. It's all about Third Estate. It's about, you buy that, the money goes into Third Estate. We go pay other authors. We put their books out. So it's more charity than, me pumping myself up. I can pump myself up in other ways, but
right.
we need some funding for Third Estate to get us going.
Well, I appreciate the background on Third Estate because I feel like they're one of those smaller presses that doesn't necessarily get as much visibility because, it's hard to be visible in such a large field. And Aquino's great. I actually found out about Third Estate through Kat Silva because I was talking to her about some projects and she had mentioned that she was working with Third Estate in, I guess, on the board capacity.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then she introduced me to Aquino at AuthorCon in the spring. So we had met each other online, but we hadn't really had a chance to interact. That was the first face to face. And he and I are both about equal percentage Paisan, so that helped out.
Oh, I'm sure it does. Yeah.
I was like, hey, he's like, hey. It's like, yeah, we were nerding out on all the things and just such a nice dude.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just felt that being able to talk about one of the titles coming out of Third Estate got me kind of excited. I was happy to see that yours was with them because we haven't had a chance to bring a Third Estate title to the show yet. So super cool.
Well, here's your first one. There you go.
You're it, man. You're the first one. So I don't want to miss the fact that you wrote this entire collection in 2023. Like
Yeah.
I want for people that aren't writers that are listening to this, maybe you're just like super fan readers of this type of fiction. I want you to understand the amount of like that's not typical. And if you look at Jacy's website, which I do have conveniently open on my screen, it's jacymorris.com. You write like you are a prolific writer, and you kind of you kind of call yourself out on that in the forward of the collection as well. You're like, hey, I write a lot. And I was like, so when I looked at your site, I was like, well, even the list of books in the front of Bury My Heart was like, holy holy cow, this dude has written a lot of books, and you're also, I'm a series writer, so it was nice to see that you also are a prolific series writer. So how did you go from did you need a break? Did you just like did you say in 2023, look, I've written enough of this, I need a change of pace for a minute? Or did you write series while you were also writing all these short stories and novellas?
Yeah, I was writing all that stuff at the same time. So, um, like I'm a 2,000 words a day, pretty much religiously. That's like writing is my addiction. That's what I do.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'll go 4,000, I'll go 6,000 words. So, I mean, I'm putting out close to 750,000 words a year,
Wow.
which is probably this collection was 90,000. So there was, you know, 650,000 more words that I wrote last year. Um, and a couple series, some standalones. When I do a standalone, I kind of try and sell that off because as a self-publisher, I'm kind of in between moving from self-publisher to traditional now.
Sure.
But when I self-publish a standalone book, it doesn't do anything hardly. And I'm not a big marketing guy. I'm not a big get out there and rah 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 for my book all the time. It's just not my thing. I'm doing it for Bury My Heart because it's not about me. It's about the collection in Third Estate. But when I publish a standalone, it's not going anywhere. I know that. I've done it before. Um, my fans that I have, a few thousand fans that are very loyal, and they're just like, when's the next This Rotten World coming out? This is great. Why don't you start writing This Rotten World? So I kind of know what George R. R. Martin's feeling these days because every time he says something, it's like, cool, dude, where's that next book? That's what they're doing to me with This Rotten World, which I love. It keeps me writing This Rotten World. Um, but yeah, um, I'm all about getting stuff out there. It's the process is slowed for me. I signed with an agent in June, and he's like, "Well, let me sell this book," and I'm like, "Cool." And then I sent him another one, and he's like, yeah, well, let me just sell this one." I sent him another one, and I just finished the fourth one for him, and he's like, he's still working on selling the first one. So that's slowing me down a bunch, but we'll see where it goes, right?
Dude, that's awesome. It makes me so happy hearing that. I just love that you've got this constant flow of inspiration and you're just rolling. And as a fellow series writer, I have a tremendous amount of respect for crafting a series and the work that it takes to carry characters through so many different iterations of books and all the things. I mean, this Rotten World series right now, you've got it at 8 books. Is that the planned length for the series, or do you even plan the series length? How's that working out for you?
Well, this Rotten World, it's actually up to 9. I have to update my website, and then I'm 60% of the way through 10. Um, and it actually goes in two phases. The first phase was the first 5 books was a certain set of characters, and then I reset with a new set of characters, and they're going to get 6 books out of their journey. Um, so I'm going to finish that at 11, and then there's a little more there that I've already got thought out and planned that I'll do with that series, and then I'm thinking 14 or 15, and then I'll be done with it unless something else happens to pop into my head and I want to keep going with that story, um, because people love them. I like writing them. They're like like that 90s action flick you just throw out there. You're like, this is like there's nothing amazing going on here. It's just fun. Characters are doing stuff. I work some commentary in there, but that's kind of like my popcorn flick that I like to put out there. So yeah.
That's awesome, man. And you've got obviously you've got a whole nother series as well on your website, the One Night Stand at the End of the World series, which I was cracking up when I saw that title. I was like, oh wait, which of these elements is he going to pull out of the title on each book cover? And it's the one night stand stays on every cover. It's one night stand at the end of the world, in the wastes, in almost IKEA. I was like dying laughing. In a place with no name and in the box, and I thought it was just really cool. Is this like a post-apoc?
Yeah, it's a post-apocalyptic sort of. The premise is it's like it's a comedian who travels around the wasteland, and that's how he makes his living. And he's a total nut job. He's just broken inside, and you're like, that's how he goes. And he's on this mission. You're not quite sure about it, and then it kind of it builds up. It's not this rotten world is like you never know who's gonna die, and that's kind of the charm of it. Like some people get very angry that they're like, oh, I love that character, and you just killed them. And I'm like, oh, that's what it is. That's what I do. And then this one is kind of like an epic sort of comedy, horror, satire. There's a lot of satirical elements in there. Um, I'm not a big fan of the world, so I like to make fun of it. And One Night Stand is my chance to do that. It's probably the most me writing. Like if you're just like hanging out with me, this is the type of stuff you're gonna get when you're just chilling with me. So
Nice.
it's great. The people that like it love it. I'm I'm very happy with it. I love writing. It's up to 6 now as well. I've still got to update my website. I hate updating my website. So, um, but yeah, I like writing that one too.
Nice. And then you've got Enemies of Our Ancestors series. And is that fixed at 3 books?
That's fixed. That's finished. So that one was uh, the first thing I really focused on, where I'm like, I really want to explore my indigenous identity and writing. Um, because before that, I was just like, well, I'm going to write what people want to read. Because that's what I thought you would do when I first started writing. It's like, well, I don't want to write what I want to write. I want to sell some books. I want people to read this and like it. And they do. They like This Rotten World. Um, and then The Enemies of Our Ancestors was sort of the book that I would have wanted to read when I was a kid. And I read horror when I was a kid. Like I was like in the library picking out the unabridged Stand version like at 10. I was like, let me read this thing. It's massive. Let's read this. And then, but those are the types of books I wanted to read because they didn't have them. I didn't have any indigenous authors. And it's sort of a kind of pre-Columbian like horror. Um, some people might call it fantasy, but I really think it's just horror. It's very grounded in the guts and bones of very horrible things happening in this world. So that's a finished series. Super. I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it. Um, it's got its warts because it's sort of when I was first starting writing. And I've you just grow and grow. You start working with editors. You're like, oh, I do all this stuff. Oh, I guess I'll stop doing that. So it's filled with those type of things. But people that read it like it. I like it. I'm proud of it. Some people go and delist their old books, but they were pretty good. They're not as good as I write now, but they're pretty good.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I appreciate that is I guess what I'm trying to say because even in my current series, which is my real first like attempt at writing professional fiction, uh, it was I look at the prequel novella Bury the Child and I go, wow, that just feels and sounds so different from to me because like I'm so sensitive to my own writing. It feels so much different than the following novels in the series because it was really honestly it was still kind of finding my voice and it was just so gothic. It's like it's just like let's just slow burn this like horrible feeling of grief and all this stuff and then when you read the later ones they're kind of like bam bam and they're just rolling and so yeah I feel you on that. There's definitely a difference between your earlier stuff, especially when you're writing at the pace you're writing and with the number of titles you're writing, because I mean, you move quickly. So now your standalones, and again, not picking on your website, there's 7 of them on here. Is that like, that's a lot of standalone novels for someone who's also writing all those series?
Yeah, there's those 7, and then there's 2 more coming out next year. But there's 7 out now of the standalones, um, and then yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say about the standalones. They're just kind of their standalones, right? Um,
Are they like I guess I guess are they all novels, or are they all not, or is it a mix of novels and novellas?
I think The Lady That Stayed was kind of a novella. It's very short. It might not even be novella length. It might be like novelette. Um, and that was just kind of something I wrote that I had an idea and it just went very fast. And I'd reached that phase where I'm like, I don't really care how long things are anymore.
Mhm.
The story is going to be what the story is going to be. I'm not going to pad it out. It's either going to be short and hit real fast, or it'll be what it wants to be. The Taxidermied Man, that was through Bizarro Pulp Press. That was a novella. Um, and that was my first one published, not by me. Uh, and that was enlightening. That's why I started writing novellas. I was like, oh, people just want novellas. Okay, I'll just write 3 of these next year. And then those are in the collection. And the other ones are all novels.
Gotcha. Awesome, man. And I mean, I could see some common theme in your covers. And I did want to kind of come back to the cover of "Bury My Heart with a Keyboard" for a moment. Also, I mean, I got a glimpse of why you titled it that in the forward, but I would love for you to explain that to the listeners and watchers as well. But dude, tell me about this working with Don Noble on this cover, right? So that was the connection with Brian Boyer I was mentioning before. Is like I first heard about Don by interviewing Brian, and he had mentioned that Don does all of his covers. So is this the first cover? Well, this is you've done several covers with Don Noble, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I even can. I had some covers that I just didn't like from back in the day, and I had him redo a couple of them. So I was just like, those don't look like my style anymore. Don is my style now. So
Well,
uh,
that's awesome, because once you get your hands on a good cover artist, it does make quite a finger like it makes a pretty big impression on your brand and your the visibility of your stories, from the continuity across your brand, I guess, of stories. And you can definitely tell that with Brian's work, and I can see that in your work, that you've done a really good job of like keeping all your covers for your series well themed and very much aligned, and then working outside of this series with Don Noble on this one. I was cracking up because when I first saw the cover, I don't know that I really had the title of the book in my head, like firmly planted in my head yet. So I see this skeleton leaning back with this like pink purple kind of light coming from it. And I'm like, what is that sticking out of its chest? And then I'm like, of course, like, come on, Marino, get your stuff together. I'm like, the title of the book is "Bury My Heart with a Keyboard." So at first I saw the cover and I saw the title and I'm like, okay, now I'm intrigued about what's going on with this collection. Why is this the cover and title of this collection? And then in your opening, you talk about like how much you write, and they may as well like just bury your when you die, like bury a keyboard next to my heart, because this is all I do. So
yeah,
where
I
did
mean,
you
it's
come up with
also,
that?
uh, well, I was thinking about, since it is so, there are so many indigenous horror stories in there. There's an old book called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, that kind of details kind of like the wars that were had and the interactions with the government that were had. And those always kind of stuck with me, is like, when you get older and you start learning the history of what your people went through and the tragedy of all that stuff. That's a part of who I am now, like that. You learn it, it gets in you, whether you emotionally feel it or not, you do feel it in some way. And so I just kind of wanted to, I reflected on that. I started with that Bury My Heart, and I'm like, or yeah, Bury My Heart. And then I just kind of built it out. I'm like, well, how do I reference that? And then, use that as kind of inspiration for what I want. And that's what I came up with. And then the visuals, that's basically what I told Don to make. He's pretty good. I give him like 2 or 3 sentences and he goes off with it and makes it look cool. Um, so we have a good working relationship. He can get in my head. I think I met Brian before I met Don, and then I got Don covers, and Brian was like, "Oh yeah, those are good." And so he might have gotten those once I started getting them.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great, man. Yeah, it was cool to see that connection. And I just love Brian. To this day, he still has my most popular podcast episode on the show.
Yeah, Brian's awesome, dude. That
Yeah.
voice is just like he sometimes like I asked him for a blurb for "Bury My Heart" with a keyboard. Then he sent me this message like, dude, I can't get over your voice, man. Every time it just kills me. It was just like sent me like a video message on Twitter.
He's a trip, man. Yeah, that voice, he's very distinct. And he's got just enough of that West Virginia accent that you can tell it's there, but it was hard to place that it's West Virginia because I'm just not trained for all that, man. But dude, you would, I mean, you'll probably understand this, but I was so like when I interviewed him, it was literally when I was like learning his background. So as he's telling me his story, I'm like in real time, just like, what? Like, it's just crazy, this wild ride. And I told my 16-year-old who was editing the podcast, I said, you need to watch this whole episode, dude. And he was like, man, that guy's wild. I said, yeah, I love him, dude. Brian and I are good buddies now online. At least we haven't been able to meet in person yet. But yeah, 6'5" and all the craziness, man. It was just awesome. But we connected over music first, which brings me to like my next question. And this doesn't usually end up being a major theme for collections, but the fact that you wrote this whole collection in a year, it might actually emerge. But like, was there a certain music that inspired the stories in this collection, or at least stood out as an inspiration for some of the collection?
My musical background is like I'm a punk rocker. Like if you pinned me down and said, "Hey, tell me what you are," I'm gonna say I'm an indigenous punk rock horror writer. And so punk rock is kind of my jam. I've always got it going in the background when I'm writing. I've got music videos on, but nothing really. There are a few that are inspired by music. There's one called Dude LaRude Sings the Black and Blues, and that's about this crazy dream I had where this Gigi Allen type guy gets voted in to do the NBA All Star game. And this is like an actual dream I had. And he goes out there and he's just like naked and kids and families are like, whoa, what's going on? And he just starts cutting on himself. And I was like, I woke up, I was like, what is going on in my head? And so he was inspired by that. I flipped it and made an indigenous sort of counterculture, like don't want to be here type guy. But that happens in that story. It's very visceral and very punk rock. I'll say that much. And
Nice.
then the other one that's sort of inspired by music would be uh, the first novella. I'm not sure if it's the first or I think it's the first one. Seek Hair, which is about this dude that goes to a punk rock concert with his brother, and his brother gets kind of killed by Nazis there, and so he's going to go take his revenge on him. And that's kind of inspired by my in my youth going to concerts in Portland, and there was just Nazis there that were pretty bad customers. They were pretty rough dudes, and a lot of them wound up in jail. Some, they killed some people. Like it was always a kind of a hairy moment where you're just standing there trying to listen to, like Voodoo Glow Skulls or something, and these people are over here like doing kung fu kicks in the middle of the place, and no one wants to get next to them because they're just looking for trouble. They're just looking for someone to step up to them and say something. So um, I did do a series of posts where I tried to go through and like pick a song to match to um, each one of these stories, and it was really hard. And I just kept coming back to like Dropkick Murphys, and I was like, I could apparently match a Dropkick Murphys song to anything I've ever written. Is how it works. They have so many songs that you can just match any Dropkick Murphys song to whatever you've written. There's just something out there for it. So that's
Nice.
kind of that's the musical influence. Yeah.
Dude, that's great. I grew up on metal and hard rock and everything, and my intro to punk was the Dead Kennedys, and I freaking love the Dead Kennedys. They're just so good, and I had it was I think I was in sixth grade, man. It was like my girlfriend had these huge bangs, because it was like what, 1989 or 1990 or whatever.
I remember those. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so good. But that's like my summer of sixth grade was the Dead Kennedys. Freaking love it, man. Okay, so last question before we run, because I know we're getting tight on time, is have you read anything great lately that you want to recommend to our listeners? Like, is there anything that just kind of jumped out at you recently as something worth mentioning?
Um, I mean, I have my go-to kind of favorites. I still like Danger Slater's House of Rot, which is fantastic. If you haven't read that one, read it. It's pretty gross. I'm icked out by fungus, so it features pretty prominently in there. I have a friend named Carlos E. Rivera who's been working on this trilogy, the White Harbor trilogy, and it's probably the most epic Lovecraftian thing I've ever read. It's just sprawling, so many characters, and his imagination for creatures is like insane. And I've been reading. He was kind enough to share the third one with me to kind of get some feedback on it, and I was like, yeah, this is gonna be awesome. People are gonna love this. And then I recently read my first Laurel Hamilton book. Was it Below? Down Below? And that was fantastic. That was cool. It was definitely outside my normal range of stuff that I read. It's kind of like a creature feature type story, but it's got some good messaging to it. Um, and then I have a stack of stuff I got for my birthday. They're just sitting there like looking at me like, when are you gonna start reading me? Um, so I've got like the new Gabino Iglesias. I've got the new Stephen Graham Jones. I've got all the usual customers, and I'm waiting to dig into those. So.
Well, I'm gonna say something. I probably shouldn't admit this on. I told you before, like I'm not very formal on the show, but I'm gonna have to admit something publicly, only to hold myself accountable. I have never read a Stephen Graham Jones book. I don't know what is going on in my life, but I've been surrounded by just excellent recommendations and opinions on his work. I've never once had someone say, you know what, don't read it, don't read this Stephen Graham Jones book. Like never once. Everyone's been like, dude, you got to
Yeah.
read this. And for some reason, I just haven't gotten around to reading his stuff. So this, I'm going on the record now publicly saying by the end of this year, I need to have at least one of his books under my belt because it's just been too long, man. I've gone too long without
Yeah.
doing it. So
When I first started writing, I was like, dude, this is gonna be awesome. I'm gonna be like the biggest indigenous horror author that's ever lived. And then like I don't know, like 3 or 4 years ago, I finally like heard about him. I read his book. I was like, great, awesome. I'm gonna be the second biggest indigenous horror author you've ever read.
yeah, yeah, that's so great, man. I mean, it's he's so well respected and loved, and his work is obviously so supported in the community. So I love to see that. And yeah, man, you know what? Number two sounds good. let's do,
It works
let's
for me.
yeah, let's do it. All right, man. Well, is there anything that you want to tell people on the way out here about where you're going to be anytime soon? Promotions or any other publications that you want to mention?
I'm not really gonna be anywhere yet. I don't know. I'm still thinking of those things. Um, I'm kind of a last minute person.
Hmm.
But I do have a couple books coming out next year, in addition to my own sort of self-published titles. But I'd like to get those out there, get them on the radar. So the first one I have is called, oh shoot, We Like It Cherry, from Tenebrous Press, and that should be coming out summertime around that area. Um, Very happy with that book. I feel like it might be one of the best things I've ever written. Um, it's like one of those things where you're like, am I going to write anything better than that? I don't know. I'm going to keep trying, but I don't know. I don't know. That one's awesome. And then I have in November of next year, I have one coming out from Torrid Waters from Crystal Lake Publishing. That one's called One Shot, and that's kind of a weirdo book about some dude going on a wacky road trip, and things happen.
Yes. Love it, dude. Well, you guys watching or listening to this, go check those out. Definitely go check out Bury My Heart with a Keyboard, published by Third Estate Books. Check out Jacy's website, jcmorris.com. Jacy, you have been awesome, man. I'm so glad that we were connected. I'm really enjoying the collection. You're an outstanding writer. Really cool dude. It was such a nice, you know, we had our fun, trying to get this thing to work today, schedule wise, tech wise, everything. And I'm just grateful that it worked out because it would have been a damn shame if we hadn't had this conversation. I'm psyched to have met you, man, and I'm really looking forward to Now I got tons of books to catch up on. Stop being so prolific, dude. I can't catch up. How am I going to read all this? So,
I say
guys, go
start
check.
at the end and work backwards.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you'll be
So
like, what am I? Then you know when to stop, right? You hit one, you're like, that wasn't so good. I think I hit the wall. I read all the good stuff.
I hit it all. Yeah. Everything before this has got to be, got to be refuse. So cool, man. Well, thanks again for taking the time out of your day to meet with me. And guys, go check out all the cool stuff that Jacy's doing. I'd look forward to having you on the show again soon, dude.
Yeah, man. It's been a pleasure meeting you. I loved it.
Later, guys.